Good morning. It is still morning. Actually, my clock says it's really early morning because it hasn't shifted over yet to Europe time for some strange reason. But my name is Nate Schutta. I'm going to talk to you very briefly here this morning about microservices. Now, I spend most of my days talking to customers about the cloud. And of course, the cloud means a lot of different things to different people. Unfortunately, for a lot of developers, the cloud means microservices. And so a lot of folks are getting very excited about domain-driven design. You know, Eric's book's been out a long time. People are dusting off their copies and going, I knew I'd have a use for this someday. And people are very excited about figuring out where their bounded context might be. And you might be defining a ubiquitous language for your organization or forming two pizza teams, which I'm not finding terribly satisfying, by the way. But, anyway, this is how people work. The problem is we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. And we're forgetting that great line from Jurassic Park. You were so preoccupied with whether you could, you didn't stop to think if you should. And we're starting to get some pretty serious pain out of that. There is already the beginning of sort of that microservices backlash, and people are going, wow, my call structure is really ugly now. This is referred to as the Death Star architecture for a reason. I think this is why the Death Star keeps blowing up. It's all microservices. Now, there are many good reasons to adopt microservices, and I'll run through a few of them here this morning. But the thing that I have spent a lot of my time trying to get developers to understand is there's no free lunches here. And none of this stuff comes for free. There are consequences to every design decision we make. And so if we're going to add this complexity to our environment, because make no bones about it, it is more complicated to have a microservices architecture, we need to understand what we're getting for that price. And we need to ask ourselves very honestly, does my application actually benefit from that added complexity, or have I just made my job harder than it has to be? Am I adding accidental complexity into the mix? So one of the messages I've been trying to deliver to developers now for a couple of years is, when should we consider microservices? When do microservices make sense? Now, in fairness, I can use that same framing with literally every technology we've ever had in our industry. I'll talk about this more later today, but one of the things I've seen throughout my career, I've been guilty of it myself, is the practice of resume-driven design, where we decide we need to use a technology so we have an excuse to put it on a resume. And that's why I have been doing this. Please use microservices responsibly. This actually started as work with clients. A friend of mine and I were locked in a windowless conference room for far too many minutes, far too many hours, and my friend wrote these principles up on the board, and then I made the mistake of turning it into a blog series, and my person who was my editor said, please write more, and thus was born these principles. So if you want to see the prose version, go check that out on our blog. So the first thing we look at is multiple rates of change. There's a pretty good chance that some parts of your system are changing all the time, and others haven't changed since the initial commit. So if you find yourself in a situation where parts of your system evolve at different speeds, microservices can help you here. We also want to consider independent life cycles. Monoliths, they're big ships. They don't turn on a dime. And that was fine when things moved fairly slowly in our industry. But that's not the world we live in today. We have to embody that always be changing mindset. We need to be able to run experiments. We need to be able to do A/B testing. We need to be far more responsive to our business partners than we've been in the past. We need to deliver in days, not months. At Spring One a couple of years ago, a gentleman from Scotiabank got up and talked about their journey from the quarterly release cycle to thousands of releases a month. Now, that doesn't happen overnight, but that's the environment we live in today. Speed matters. Speed kills. Disruption is impacting all of us. There is no industry that's immune from that. We need to think about independent scalability. This is one of the important wins we get with microservices. If you think about the monolith, we had to make decisions very, very early, often when we knew almost nothing. So how much capacity do you think you're going to need? The only legitimate answer we could give is, I have no idea. And so we would take our worst case and we would double it, and then we'd add some more, and then we'd double it again just in case, because it was really hard to get capacity later. Microservices, cloud environments flip the script because I can add, remove capacity as necessary. I can wait for the last responsible moment as opposed to having to guess and hope. We need to think about failure isolation. You get into a microservice ecosystem and all of a sudden you realize my one microservice doesn't in fact solve all problems. Shocking. Who could have predicted this? This is where we think about Obi-Wan Kenobi. You've taken your first step into a larger world. No microservice works alone. That's what we mean by micro. So you've got these third-party dependencies, and they're going to fail. So what do we do about that? Failures find a way. This is one of my favorite things to do with clients. Walk through their architecture and just ask, what happens if that fails? And what I hear a lot is, it can't fail. And I sort of laugh to myself internally, because it's rude to do that out loud in front of clients, and realize, of course they can fail. And of course, the problem for us is our customers don't care why our system's down. We can't just point the finger and say, well, it's their fault. They don't care. It's our fault. So we can use microservices as a way to isolate these failure cases. Now, one of the reasons developers love microservices is because they can finally go polyglot. We can finally justify using insert esoteric language here. Oh, good, I have an excuse to use Kotlin or Groovy or Scala or Clojure or insert your favorite database here. Now, of course, traditionally, the monolith forced us to be kind of one toolkit to serve them all. And I've worked in plenty of organizations that described themselves by their tech stack. AKA, we're a Java shop, we're a Ruby shop, we're a .NET shop. Or in other words, I've got a really big hammer, please somebody bring me a problem to solve. I mean, this is what we did traditionally. And there were good reasons for this, to be fair. But cloud computing, again, removes that constraint from us. We actually can be polycloud or polyglot programmers now. It isn't just a pipe dream. Now, I do want to stress that this can't be a free-for-all. A lot of developers think, awesome, I can use anything and everything. Somebody has to be the adult in the room, because when you consider the impact that having multiple tech stack has on your organization, think about how hard it is to hire today. Now add 4 or 5 or 6 languages on top of that. What do we do about that? How do we solve that problem? At the end of the day, microservices do give us some very impressive benefits, but there's trade-offs here. They all come at a price. And the message that I've been trying to give folks is these things are just tools. The challenge for us is knowing when to use which tool. So the best way to describe this, tell you a story from my own personal life. My wife and I finished our basement last year, by which I mean I wrote out checks to other people to do the work because I'm a software person. I don't do hardware. I have one hammer, and that's more than sufficient for me to screw up any project around the house. The folks who came to do the work, though, they didn't just have one hammer. They had a truck full of hammers, and they knew when to use which one. They use a framing hammer when they're putting up the walls. They don't use the framing hammer when they're putting up that very nice maple trim. What makes them experts is knowing when to pick which tool. We need to have that same level of discipline. We need to be able to step in and say, this is when it's right to use that tool. And that's on us to pick the right tool for the job. Please do not add complexity unless you're getting something in return for that. Believe me, not everything actually has to be a microservice today. You should use them when they make sense. You should use them when they add value. You should use them when they're the right architectural decision for you and the problems that you're solving. Please microservice responsibly, I beg you. If you need one or more of these principles, go forth and prosper. And there are other reasons too. I don't mean this to be an exhaustive list. The ones that I wrote down are not necessarily the only reasons you should ever use microservice. But please, use them responsibly. And you know what? If you don't need one of these principles, that's fine. We can always just default to serverless. That seems to be the new hotness. We'll all just do that. I actually had somebody last year say to me, I'm going to refactor my entire application as a series of functions. And I thought, that's interesting. Good luck to you. I hope that works out. Again, please choose the right technology to solve the problem that's in front of you. I wish you luck. Thank you very much. Cheers.